All right, March Madness. It is the eve of March Madness. Of course, the games did start on Tuesday. We got the play-in games here tonight. But really, for all intents and purposes, a lot of people see tomorrow as a start of March Madness, which means that it's a very good time for you to head on over to PropSwap.com/BTB, see what kind of tickets are out there for the futures market and the props market. A lot of props listed for teams to make the Sweet 16, yes or no. Then, of course, all the future stuff that's out there in college basketball. And it's not just college hoops over at PropSwap either. You've got NBA, NHL, some NFL props out there. I'm sure there's Major League Baseball postings, and NHL I know there's college hockey over there as well. So plenty of things going on over at PropSwap. If you're a buyer, you're interested in getting in the market, you're going to find odds that you can't find anywhere else out there in the industry because sellers are selling you their tickets. They want to get some equity out of the investments that they've made, and they're willing to sell those at odds that other sports books simply can't match. Well, if you're looking to be a seller, you got a good opportunity there to hedge some of your futures without having to put out any initial investment to bet against the play that you've already made. Get some equity out of it right away. Maybe you don't like the draw for the NCAA tournament here. Put your ticket up on PropSwap. See what people are willing to pay you. Also, there is a negotiation process, so you may get an interested party that wants to talk you down a little bit. If you're comfortable with that price, you can look to sell it at that point. So head on over to PropSwap.com/BTB. Lots of tickets posted over there with everything that's going on right now. Once again, PropSwap.com/BTB. We got one more guest here for this Wednesday edition of Bang the Book Radio. That is professional handicapper Kyle Hunter from HunterSportsPicks.com and daily contributor to BangTheBook.com. Kyle, how's it going today, man?
Going all right, man. Just really busy day. Too many things going on at one time, and you know how that is. It's a day with a lot here on the slate, but I'm looking forward to the beginning of March Madness.
What the hell do you mean you're busy on the eve of March Madness? How can you possibly be busy today?
Stunning, right?
Yeah, that's crazy. I can't believe it. I can't believe that you're putting in the time and effort to handicap the college basketball card the way that you do. That's it's remarkable. But hey, you know what? Look, I mean, this is a great time of year, and the one nice thing about this, and you and I have talked about this, we talked about it when we did our 4 conference tournament preview shows and hit all 32 of them. This is a lot. There's a lot going on. Both of us are going to have, an emotional crash once all of this is over. But the nice thing is it doesn't really feel that much like work.
Yeah, it's nice, but, it's enjoyable. Because if it wasn't enjoyable, it'd be, damn near impossible to keep this type of thing up. But definitely something that's enjoyable to cover. And, I'm looking forward to the games tipping off. I like breaking things down and all that, but I'm looking forward to all the action and hoping we have an exciting first round of March Madness. I mean, I think March Madness is the one sporting event where I really like, the first and second round probably the most of anything because just so much action going on. You get later on, sure, there can be some good games, but I love the, multiple games going on at the same time, trying to keep track of everything. I like that.
Well, and as we're complaining here about, all the stuff we have to do with college basketball at this time of the year, I'm sure there are CPAs and tax preparers out there MFing us over and over and over again about the workloads that they have here at this time of the year. But one thing we neglected to do on Monday, and a lot of this is because we wanted to talk about the NIT, CBI, CIT, and get some general NCAA tournament thoughts out there. We didn't talk a whole lot about the futures market. And, of course, we'll get hedging questions as we go throughout here. But I know there were a few futures you mentioned in your video over on our Bang the Book YouTube page yesterday that were of interest to you here. And I kind of talked about this on the Monday Mailbag a few weeks ago that there wasn't a whole lot of equity going into conference tournaments in playing futures because you're so close to the NCAA tournament that you're better off just waiting for the draw. Well, now we have the draw. So are there any futures that you wanted to touch on here?
Yeah, a few futures here that I like. I think Louisville, I saw 150-1. I know that Michigan State's a very good team, and obviously Louisville could lose in their first game. But, Louisville's a team where you can either take them 150-1 here, you can take them to get to the Sweet 16, which is, plus 450, plus 475, somewhere in that range. So I'm not sure which would be the better way to take that, to be totally honest. You'd have to sit down and try to figure that out. But if you take the price to win it all, you can easily hedge out after the first couple games. The thing about the Louisville draw here to me is it's all about the Michigan State game, because I think if Louisville beats Michigan State, they have a very real chance of winning the next game. So that's what I like about that one is, LSU, Maryland, Belmont, whoever gets there, Louisville would have a very real chance of beating them. So I think that's a pretty good value play. Also, you have to kind of at least like Oregon some based on their draw. I think Oregon, Wisconsin is a coin flip. You get that coin flip game there at the beginning, and then you get a Kansas State team, or maybe even UC Irvine. You get a Kansas State team that is, certainly shorthanded without Wade in there. I think Oregon to reach the Sweet 16, or Oregon just, they were 300-1 when I took them. I think that's a good play based on being able to, hedge out at a nice profit if they win a couple games there. So that's a couple of the ones I like. I kind of like Texas Tech also to win the NCAA tournament. I'm not sure where this price is now. I think it was 32-1 yesterday when I talked about it. Texas Tech's a really good team. I think Chris Beard's an excellent coach. Their bracket is not necessarily really easy. Buffalo, a tricky first game. Michigan, obviously not an easy matchup by any means, and that would be a tremendous coaching matchup in that one. But I think that this Texas Tech team is a little bit better than some people think now based on, they had that really bad game last game against West Virginia. Maybe that was good for them. This is a really good defense team with a star and Culver. I like Texas Tech quite a bit. The other one that I talked about on the video that I like pretty well is Kentucky 17-1. Obviously, I want P.J. Washington to be healthy, so that's something to follow up on it. Before I place that bet, I would definitely want to make sure that he's healthy. It sounds like it's precautionary, what's going on with him right now. But, make sure that he's healthy. But I think Kentucky 17-1 is a pretty good value as long as they're a healthy team, because I think that Midwest region is pretty wide open. And I think Kentucky would match up pretty well with UNC if that's the Elite Eight game. Definitely think Kentucky is a team that could be in the Final Four or even the final game.
Yeah, I like the Kentucky one a lot out of the, the chalkier prices, for lack of a better term, that are out there because, and of course, Five Dimes conveniently took down their NCAA tournament futures here this morning because they usually have the best prices out there in the futures market. Kentucky is only 12-1 at BetOnline, so a little bit of a price discrepancy there. But with Kentucky, and we'll talk about this obviously in the Midwest region, but you want to be looking for teams that may get a nice situational spot in the second game, or maybe in the Sweet 16, something like that. Where, for example, Kentucky gets the winner of Wofford and Seton Hall, and I think Wofford got screwed by the draw, but B, that's a game that probably goes down to the wire. Whereas Kentucky's going to beat Abilene Christian by whatever score they want to beat them by. So you're going to have a team playing a very quick turnaround after the late game in Jacksonville coming up here on Thursday, and then they got to play Kentucky. So they're already up against it. Gives Kentucky a decent path to the Sweet 16. And then in that 3, 6, 11, 14 range, I think Houston's a very good team, but I also think Kentucky, has some matchup advantages over Houston as well. So those are things you want to look for here with the futures market. Okay, it's not just about the matchups and the teams, but also, if you've got a game that's going to come down to the wire, and that team's going to have to turn around a day later and get off the mat and step up again, that's a hard thing to do, especially against somebody who's an elite team like Kentucky.
Yeah, I think so as well. Kentucky's a team that has a really high upside, and you have the kind of talent that Kentucky has. As long as they're focused here, this is a tough team to beat. And Calipari, say what you will about him, he's a good coach. He's proven that. His teams are tough to beat in March. They haven't necessarily won as many titles as some people would think, but they've gotten pretty far. I think that this Kentucky team, while I wouldn't pick them to win the entire thing, I think that, getting to the final game, getting to the Final Four is a very real possibility for them. So that's definitely one that I like some. I'll say as a long shot here, I'm just looking at the Sweet 16 odds. Yale to reach the Sweet 16 at plus 1,200. So if you want a long shot, this Yale team has a chance against LSU. I'm not saying Yale is going to beat LSU. I'm saying that LSU does have a lot of turmoil, question marks there. LSU will likely beat Yale, but there's certainly a chance. But if Yale wins that game, the thing that's more important to me here is if Yale does pull that upset, and we do see 14-3 upsets sometimes. I think LSU might be a bit overseeded as a 3 seed as well. And as I said, I think Yale's a little bit underseeded as a 14. If they win that game, certainly a winnable game after that. Maryland or Belmont, they're not teams that they would have no chance against. So, Yale to reach the Sweet 16, if you like a long shot, I think that's one of the better long shots on the board.
Well, and as I'm looking at that one, Yale in the plus 260 money line range here against LSU. I don't know what the line would be against Maryland. Against Belmont, I mean, they're not a big underdog at all if they're an underdog in that game. So that's one of those, again, we talk about money line rollovers and the value behind those. A lot more equity usually in a money line rollover than taking a futures price. And you certainly want to factor that into the equation here for these Sweet 16 props as well. I think in this case, the plus 1,200 is a little bit better than the money line rollover would be. But some of these, the money line rollover for the first two games, going to be a better option for you. So keep that in mind. Something like Louisville, for example, who we've already talked about, Louisville plus 450, well, you're probably better off just taking the money line against Michigan State because that game against Minnesota, if something bad happens, then you're not sitting there with a dead ticket. Louisville's probably plus, 300 or 350-ish against Michigan State, something like that. So you're probably better off just taking that money line straight as opposed to the plus 450 and have them have to win two games. So these are all very important considerations that you want to keep in mind, whether it's a Sweet 16 prop or an NCAA tournament future.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think Michigan State's probably a 6.5 or 7 point, probably 7 point favorite against Louisville there. So, I think that's fair. Probably the 150 to 1 to just win the entire thing has more value than does plus 450 to reach the Sweet 16. These are case-by-case basis, but, I agree with you. I think that the money line rollover, more times than not, would probably beat the Sweet 16 odds here, especially because, there's a pretty big spread on these. You take a look at these and you've got, plus 240, minus 300. So there's quite a bit of juice on these Sweet 16 props. I don't know if that's going to tighten up at all as we get closer to the big dance actually starting here on Thursday, or if that's basically what the juice is going to be. But, anytime you have a situation where the juice is that much, it makes you wonder if the money line rollover is going to be a good play in quite a few situations.
All right, now we had a listener question from @Seaverd_3, who's been a loyal listener to the show. He's asked us a lot of questions here on our college basketball shows and MLB betting podcast. So, Chuck, always appreciate you reaching out and asking us some things here. Asking about these venues here from a totals standpoint, or even in the NIT, CBI, and CIT, some of the home venues that we're going to have there. So are there any, that really stand out one way or another as being tough for shooters or, not being a problem at all?
I think as I look down through the arenas, I made a list of these. First round here, there's really not very many bad shooting backdrops or ones that I would consider big under arenas. Wells Fargo Arena in Des Moines, probably the best of them. 129 and 109 to the under, 97 and 75 to the under with a total of 132.5 or higher. So I think that's probably the best one. It's a pretty big sample size there. Colonial Life Arena, a game where there's, a pretty big sample size because so many games are played there. 103 and 93 to the under, 60 and 45 to the under at 137 or higher. I'm not sure what to read into that one, because, it may be who's playing there more than the arena actually being a really good under arena. And then a lot of the other ones are really small sample size. XL Center in Hartford, 20 and 17 to the under, 9 and 3 to the under with a total of 135.5 or higher, but small sample size. BOK Center in Tulsa, 5 and 1 to the over. I'll just go blindly bet the over because you heard it was 5 and 1 to the over. That's a very, very small sample size. Veterans Memorial in Jacksonville, 15 and 11 to the under. Nationwide Arena, 7 and 5 to the under. I don't think there's anything that strikes me as bad about that Nationwide Arena for shooters, though. It's a really nice place I've been multiple times. I really don't think that one is a big under arena. And, if you look at where they're going to be playing going forward, I will say, as kind of a preview, the Honda Center is going to show up again here. When the Honda Center shows up, that's going to be the best under venue that we've seen here in this tournament. And then as far as the smaller tournaments, I will say that, the semifinals and the finals are always at Madison Square Garden. So you go Madison Square Garden and the Honda Center. That arguably is the two best under venues there are for any college basketball games. So in the future, we have some bigger ones. Right now here for the first round, I don't really see too many big ones. I'd say Wells Fargo Arena in Des Moines probably the best under venue.
Yeah, and the Honda Center, Anaheim, California, that's where the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight will be. In the West region, Kansas City, obviously a big sample size at the Sprint Center with the Big 12 Conference Tournament. Louisville, big sample size there. And then D.C. always has a lot of games. Those are your 4 Sweet 16 venues. Obviously, we'll see what Minneapolis looks like for the Final Four. But, Hartford had the American Athletic Conference Tournament twice, which pretty much makes up the sample size of games there for that. So, obviously, we know the AAC usually slants a little bit more towards defense. So you want to keep that in mind as you're pondering some of these results. But, of course, the CBI and the CIT and even still the early rounds here, the NIT, played on campus sites. So, you can get a sample size for that stuff. And, of course, it's going to be with that team that plays there. So I think the bigger thing to me, honestly, is location and travel situations. You've got Salt Lake City here in the NCAA tournament, but in the CBI and the CIT, you may go from Seattle to the Great Plains, or you may go from the Southeast to, the Pacific Northwest, or you may go out to California from playing in the Great Lakes. Those are the big things I look for, those travel situations in those smaller postseason tournaments.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that the travel situations in the smaller postseason tournaments probably mean more. Motivation, like we said, means a lot, especially from the side standpoint. But, this is a NIT early on. Overs make a lot of sense. The overs are going to get bet up. We'll look at some of the numbers from the starting point in the NIT and CBI to where they closed at. Some massive, massive moves to the over. There were some really high-scoring games in the NIT, CBI games last night. Keep in mind the rule changes specifically for the NIT. The NCAA tournament long-term has been a little bit more to the under than the over, nothing drastic. And then the smaller postseason tournaments have been good for the over, especially early on.
All right, so let's take a look here as we sort of go through. And, you said you wanted to recap the NIT real quickly here. We saw some major conference teams that survived and advanced, but they didn't do so in very impressive fashion. NC State won. They trailed at halftime. Texas blew a big lead, eventually got the win, didn't cover. Indiana took them forever to get going in that game. They were down 6 at the break against the St. Francis. I believe that's the Red Flash. Then you had, Clemson. They didn't look particularly good. Wright State with a wire-to-wire cover there in that one. So, now that this first game is out of the way for those major conference teams, does the focus level shift a little bit going forward?
Yeah, I wish you had given me a quiz on the St. Francis Red Flash. I would have gotten that one right. I always love the Red Flash. That's a good one. I will say that as you look at last night, the big thing that stands out to me is how these teams played in the first half. Other than Texas, all these big-name teams did not play well in the first half. It looked like they were not very excited to be there. Once you get a little bit later in the game, I think maybe more of the, hey, my season's over if I lose this game, kicks in. And the first half, it's a more lackadaisical effort, at least on the average. And I will say, the Texas game, I watched a lot of that game. Texas was making everything at the beginning of that game. It wasn't so much that Texas was out hustling South Dakota State or anything. Just every shot was going in. Texas is not a very good shooting team long term, but they were at the beginning of that game. And I will say, I think South Dakota State missed a chance. They could have won that game. You watch the end of that game, the last few minutes, South Dakota State stopped running their offense. Got a little bit helter-skelter there for a few minutes, and that cost them a chance to win that game. Texas, a team that I'll continue to be hesitant to back as a favorite. This team hasn't proven that they can lay a number. As far as the other teams there, Indiana, they win by 17, but man, they were bad for a long time. Providence, a team that would surprise you that they played as badly as they did. I mean, they're out of it now. Arkansas beats them without Arkansas's best player. So Arkansas winning shorthanded like that, surprising game to me. When you look at it on the whole, some really high-scoring games. I had 2 overs last night, and both of them lost. There were basically the 2 low-scoring games of the night last night. I did have South Dakota State against Texas, and it's been a great run here of late. And like I said, when you've won at the rate that I have here in the past week or two, you know that some regression is going to come, and I just hope that I can do well here for the rest of the way. Certainly we'll put in the hard work, but as you look at the rest of these games last night, North Carolina State, they just kind of sneak out a win against Hofstra. Now, Hofstra plays that zone defense, but their zone defense is really not very good. The CAA was not used to seeing that, and then finally, CAA teams started kicking in and just shooting really well against Hofstra late in the season. North Carolina State moves around for a while and then ends up just pulling out a win. You can see that, different teams have different motivation levels. To me, Colorado won by 5 last night. Fortunately, I had Colorado in the Bang the Book free pick article. I did have Marshall as well. Marshall did not cover. To me, Dayton played really hard in that game against Colorado. So you got to give Dayton credit. Colorado is a slightly better team than Dayton, and then Dayton appeared to gas out a little bit at the end of that game, which is not really surprising because that game was played at altitude. So Lipscomb winning at Davidson, I'll say really quick, and I know I'm talking quite a bit here, but you know how much I like the smaller tournaments as well. Lipscomb winning at Davidson, I think this Lipscomb team is a team that I would expect to be highly motivated all throughout. This isn't a team that's disappointed to be here. Certainly they would have liked to been in the NCAA tournament, but I think this is a team that would be out to prove a point. So, you certainly want to try to gauge motivation levels, and that's kind of how I see it from last night.
Yeah, I think you made a lot of great points there. And one game that I put in my Tuesday 3-pack video over on our Bang the Book YouTube page was the over in that IUPUI Marshall game. Total 166. Game only comes in at 151. But the handicap was correct. And this isn't to pat myself on the back or anything like that, but it's simply to tell our listeners that not every bet that loses is a bad bet. Because my thought process in that game was, Marshall's going to run the tempo, and IUPUI is going to play at that tempo. Because IUPUI is a team that, as the conference play season went along, they really slowed down significantly to try and limit the exposure on their defense, which was not very good at all. They wound up playing their last 6 games at 68 or fewer possessions, and they were around 71 possessions for the season. So I expected them to play at Marshall's pace, and they did. That was a game that had 81 possessions, but still goes under the number because they combined to go 16 of 56 from 3 and really struggled badly from the mid-range, going 9 of 29. So it was a bad shooting night, but the handicap was correct in that my thought process behind the over was that this game would be played at a breakneck pace, and it 100% was at 81 possessions. That's even faster than Marshall typically plays. So I want you to understand that not every bet that loses is a bad bet. Not every bet that wins is a good bet. And you're going to have a lot of these here, and with the increased volume of college basketball with these postseason tournaments, where you're going to get pissed off because a bet lost, and it's not really going to be your fault. It's just going to be how the game played out, which was something all we can do is take the information that's in front of us and make an informed bet and then hope that it works out in our favor. That one didn't work out in my favor. It was an informed bet. I made the right call from a totals and possession and tempo standpoint. It just didn't work out. So that's something I want our listeners to understand. It's something I want you to take with you into the upcoming seasons in both football and basketball, that not every bet that loses is a bad bet. Sometimes it just happens to lose.
Yep, I had that as one of my premium bets last night as well. So I like Marshall over, and if you look at the handicap, like you said, it was a good handicap. 81 possessions. Look at what they shoot last night: 0.90 points per possession for IUPUI and 0.96 for Marshall. doesn't really make any sense that those two teams would shoot that poorly when the two defenses give up, 1.08 points per possession, 1.06 points per possession, and now you're in a game that doesn't mean as much. So, the shooting numbers were just too bad to get it to that number. And Marshall only scored 8 points in the last 10 of that game. So Marshall definitely struggled down at the end. You could say they let off the gas. You could say they started goofing around. I don't know what happened because the tempo was still fast, but they started missing all their shots. So very few free throws in that game as well, which it's always hard to handicap how many fouls there will be because it depends on who's officiating the game. You don't know that ahead of time. But, yeah, that one was a good handicap that's just there, and that's going to happen. There's going to be plenty of those.
Well, not only that, that game's in fouling range with a 5-point final, and there's still no fouling at the end of that game. So, again, this isn't to, cover our tracks or anything like that. It's simply to say that if you can't handle this side of the business, don't be in this business. Don't do this as a hobby. Don't do this as a supplement, anything like that, because you have to learn to withstand these types of things. And, yeah, they're a real piss-off when you go and look at the score the next morning or when you're following along with the game. It's a real frustration. But if you're going to – let's say we get that situation again here tonight, Kyle. We know it's an 81-possession game. We know it's a 5-point final. You and I are both hammering over 166. And that's really the way that you want to evaluate these bets, I think.
Right, yeah. I'd bet it bigger than I did yesterday. So, and that's really the question afterwards when you make a bet is, what do you think of that? Do you think that was a solid play? Do you think it was a bad play? And that's why I like to handicap after the game, look through the box score, do this, it's harder to do this in baseball than it is in basketball and football. But in basketball and football, I just look afterwards and say, was that a good play or not based on how the game went? Look at the possessions and see how everything went. The Marshall game, I watched some of that game. There were a couple missed dunks in a row in that game. It was just the type of game it was, up and down the court, missing dunks, missing easy shots. It's just the way it goes. It's going to happen. It's a game that was handicapped correctly that didn't win, and sometimes you'll have some games that you didn't handicap correctly that you do win. So it's important to, point out the other side of that too. Not every bet that wins is necessarily a good bet. So I think it's important to go back after the fact and see, was that actually a good handicap or not?
Well, and again, a very good point here to drive home at this time of the year because you have a lot of people dabbling in March Madness that maybe haven't bet before that, or maybe finding the show here for the first time or maybe new listeners. And, especially with multiple states now having legalization, it's definitely an important point that, you don't want to get discouraged if you make the right handicap and it doesn't work out. It's not even necessarily a learning experience for you, except to say that it's kind of the school of hard knocks when it comes to sports betting that, this is why 55 and 56% are thought to be really, really strong success rates in this field. All right, let's go to the West region here. We'll start at the top, work our way down. Gonzaga now knows who they're going to play. It's Fairleigh Dickinson, and they're a fairly big favorite. See what I did there? Going up here against the Knights. Look, this is one of those spots where Gonzaga, if they're motivated, shouldn't have any problems as a 26.5-point favorite. If they're not, because as we talked about in yesterday's show, there's a lot of reasons for Gonzaga to look ahead to Syracuse. If that's who wins that 8-9 game, then maybe the Bulldogs don't cover this number. So they'll move on, but what do you think about their chances of covering the number?
I think this is a game that'd be a really easy pass. I want nothing to do with this game. Gonzaga played really poorly in their last game. I think that would make them be more focused for this game than if they had just won the WCC tournament and, run away with every game. But at the same time, they've had a pretty long break here. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Maybe it's a good thing because they lost their last game. But Fairleigh Dickinson shoots it well normally. A team that doesn't play very good defense. I think Gonzaga will score at will here. The total of 153, 152.5 is a fair number. I don't want anything to do with this game.
It's always interesting to see those totals up in the 150s because, Fairleigh Dickinson's a decent offense, but they also play in a really bad conference. So when they play a real team like Gonzaga here, this total would imply to a certain degree, unless Gonzaga is going to go hang, 85 or 90 points, which they certainly could. This total does imply that Fairleigh Dickinson may be able to hang in there a little bit offensively.
Yeah, Gonzaga is very capable of hanging a really big number also, and I think the books have to respect that based on how many times Gonzaga has done that. So, can Zaga score 90 points? It takes this one over the total, certainly. It wouldn't surprise me very much. Now, this is one of those games that would fit the system that we talked about the other day. Wide spread there with a top seed staying under the total because they let off the gas later. So if you like that system and you just want to blindly play that system, you're playing the under here. I'm not playing the under in this one. I think Gonzaga could score a bunch of points in this game. I think this number is a fair number.
All right, so we move to the 8-9 game here. Syracuse and Baylor, the last tip-off on Thursday, 9:57 Eastern Time in Salt Lake City for this one. I got to say, man, given Syracuse's penchant for playing really well in the postseason, whether it's the ACC tournament or the NCAA tournament here, this line of -2, I'm kind of scratching my head about it a little bit. Maybe I just don't appreciate Baylor, but this there's no such thing as a trap line, I don't think. But, man, does this line look fishy.
Yeah, I don't think there's such thing as a trap line either. I mean, there's games where the line looks confusing and you don't know what to make of it. But I don't believe in the whole trap line theory either. Syracuse, look, you want to bet against Syracuse and the NCAA tournament, be my guest. We've seen Syracuse many times in the past have teams worse than this year's team that find a way to win games in the tournament. They're built to win in the tournament. I'm not betting against them. What I will say about this game is, this Syracuse team, I think they have a little bit higher upside than some of the teams recently have had. They're playing against a Baylor team who, if you look up how they've done against the zone this year, they do rank pretty high as far as how they've done against the zone, but it's a very small sample. Almost nobody's played zone against them. And Syracuse's zone has got to be much better than what they faced during a regular season. So I'm very hesitant to say, well, Baylor's just going to tear up the zone. I don't think that, the fact that they played some zone defenses in the non-conference slate that, these teams weren't very good means much about this game. So Syracuse is a team that, like I said, I don't want to go against based on their history. Boeheim's a good coach. The zone defense has worked really well in tournaments. If you look at the bets here so far, 71% of the bets on Syracuse, 85% of the money on Syracuse. So this is one where the public and the sharps seem to like Syracuse here. I can't disagree. I think this line's going to go up. So if you like Syracuse, I think you take the -2 now. I think it's going to be 2.5 or 3 pretty soon.
Now, this is a similar concept to what we'll talk about over the Midwest region. Also, ironically enough, with the 8-9 game between Utah State and Washington, with Washington playing that matchup zone. Who are some of the other teams nationally that play a zone outside of Washington and Syracuse?
Yeah, Oregon's been mixing in quite a bit of zone here lately. Offhand, Oregon is one of the better zones that I can think about. There's a lot of teams that play zone in the smaller conferences that are just no good at it, So when you find teams that play a lot of zone, I don't think everything's created equally, that's for sure. Georgia State plays a zone all the time. One of the easiest ways to find out if you don't know a team's playing zone or not, whether they're playing zone or not, first of all, obviously watching the game is a good way to do it. But if you're looking at stats, the teams who play zone always cannot get a defensive rebound. And, if you've played basketball in the past, you know why that is. It's really hard to rebound out of the zone. So that's always their biggest weakness. Georgia State, Oregon, Syracuse are the three that I can think of that are in the tournament. Virginia Tech mixed in some zone this year on defense, but I think that was more about the fact that they were, shorthanded. They were trying to slow the game down because they were shorthanded. So I don't think they're really a team that wants to play zone that much. A lot of these teams will use that play a zone, use some kind of zone press fairly often and then just back up into the zone. It's hard to do a zone press and then back up into a man defense. So usually you see a lot of the teams that use a zone try to either press to get steals or use a press to kind of slow the game down, which people think always press is going to speed the game up, but you can also use a press to try to slow the tempo of the other team. So kind of zigzag them back and forth across the floor there. So, VCU mixes in some zone as well because of the press that they play. So UCF has been a team that's used some zone based on the fact that they can put Taco Fall right in the middle of the zone. I think that makes a lot of sense. Not a ton of teams that play zone. Most coaches are going to say, hey, I want to play man defense. You can hear the normal coaching spiel on this one almost all the time. Like, well, we're playing zone even though I really want to play man-to-man, but, this fits my personnel. Like, it's almost seen as a negative if you say I want to play zone defense. So that's pretty much what you'll hear all the time.
All right, so as we look at the potential second-round matchup here, we'll say Gonzaga against Syracuse. I mean, Baylor obviously could win. The line certainly implies that Baylor has a pretty good chance to win. But what's a Gonzaga versus Syracuse line look like in the second round?
Oh, man. Gonzaga, pretty decent-sized favorite, obviously. I'm looking at some of the numbers here to see what I think this would be as I talk. So if I'm talking in circles, that's probably why I am. But Gonzaga and Syracuse, I mean, you think about, Gonzaga knows that Syracuse is a tricky matchup. You have to think they're going to be focused, but Syracuse is still a difficult matchup. I think Gonzaga probably it looks like a lot of the power ratings would have this one at 11.5 or 12. That's too many. So, I think 9.5 or 10 points is probably where that line would be.
All right. Sorry for putting you on the spot there. I know that we try to do that as much as we can here on the show, sort of try to project those lines out a little bit. And, of course, 2016, Gonzaga lost to Syracuse 63-60 in the Sweet 16. Also lost them in 2010. Certainly the personnel much, much different. But, sort of a little bit of an Achilles heel for Gonzaga, I think we could say, facing that matchup zone, which, they don't see a whole lot of. All right, we move to Hartford here for the 5-12, 4-13 games. Marquette and Murray State. This is going to be a much talked about game from a lot of talking heads on a lot of shows like ours that don't do it quite as well as we do. Murray State here, down from a 4.5-point favorite to a 4. You like that? That was a little bit of a humble brag, huh? Murray State down from a 4.5-point dog to a 4-point dog. Some places now showing 3.5 as well. This is one of those trendy underdog 12/5 types of games.
Yeah, I'm glad you said it because that was going to be the first thing I said was humble brag right there. But it's true that you get more information and especially better betting information here than what you will on a lot of the other shows. Murray State and Marquette. Murray State is another one of these trendy underdogs. We talk about that it's been 58, and I think it was 58.6% ATS going against these trendy underdogs. So backing the favorite that's getting 49% of the bets or less in the NCAA tournament has been the way to go. If you're following that system, you're taking Marquette in this game. This line down from 5 to 4, even a 3.5, minus 115 at Chris. I think this line's starting to get a little bit out of control. There's no way I could take Murray State at this line. My concern about this one is, Marcus Howard, is he totally healthy? We saw him struggling with his wrist some in that Seton Hall game that they just played, to where he missed 6 free throws, something that he would almost never do. He's such a good free throw shooter. So it was definitely at least bothering him. He was taking the tape off and messing around with it during that game. That's the only reason I haven't bet Marquette yet. I will say at 3.5, and the way this line is going, it may get down to 3. If this line gets down to 3, I'll probably have to take Marquette no matter what. Murray State's a good team. Ja Morant, tremendous player, very good NBA player. He's going to be a very highly drafted player. I would assume he'd be in the top 5 in the NBA draft. Morant, very good. The team around him, pretty good, and Marquette is a pretty deep team. Murray State did win the OVC tournament. Anybody who watched the Murray State game against Jacksonville State, boy, that was just some brutal officiating. You could argue that Murray State was very fortunate to win that OVC tournament. Marquette is probably not getting enough love here based on this number. I will say Marquette lost 5 of their last 6 games, so that's part of the reason. But, this is one of those trendy underdogs that I couldn't take Murray State here. It would either be Marquette or pass. And then as far as the total, I lean to the over in this one. I think that the tempo will be pretty quick. Murray State's defense has some pretty good defensive numbers, but they haven't faced offenses like Marquette very often at all. So I think both teams play a pretty quick pace, and I think we might see some points in this one.
Another underdog getting some love here in the first game of this Hartford pod tomorrow afternoon, 2 o'clock Eastern time. Vermont getting some love against Florida State. This number down from 11 to 9, pretty much market wide here. This one surprises me a little bit because a lot of times you will see, the 12s or the 13s getting some love because they're playing a, 4 or 5 seed that's just kind of boring, plays a defensive style of game, a team that feels ripe for an upset. There's an enormous athletic mismatch in this game, and I'm kind of surprised to see this line down into single digits.
Yeah, I'm definitely surprised at this one too. I mean, you look at Vermont's roster. Let's look at who plays for Vermont, who actually gets on the court, not just, who's on the roster. The tallest player that plays is 6'6". So, I mean, Florida State has a massive, massive height advantage here. And I mean, Florida State is the 12th tallest team in the country. Their average player is taller than 6'6". So, when you get a Kumaji at 7'4" and Kabengele at 6'10", I mean, these are guys that are really tall and have long arms. It's going to be a hard matchup for Vermont. I like Vermont as a team. If they had a different matchup, I think Vermont could have made some noise. It'll surprise me if Vermont, can hang in there against Florida State. I'll say the one thing that makes me cautious about laying the points with Florida State, Leonard Hamilton, not the best coach. I know that Florida State had a good run. They pulled some upsets there in the ACC tournament. Hamilton's a good recruiter, but once you get in the game, he's not as good as a lot of these other coaches. So Florida State's inconsistency troubles me quite a bit. They are still a team that lost at Pitt by 13 and at Boston College by 5 points. They have a high upside, low downside. This is a Florida State team that you never know exactly what you're going to get. So I don't think I'll bet this one, but I am surprised that Vermont is down to 9. I mean, this was 11.5, down to 9. 58% of the bets on Vermont, 79% of the money. So everybody so far liking Vermont. The matchup, to me, doesn't indicate that this is the right play.
Well, I mean, Vermont does get a little bit of a boost in the sense that they stay in the Northeast. They'll play in Hartford. Florida State with a long trip from Tallahassee up to Hartford. But, Florida State, a team accustomed to traveling. They're accustomed to going up the East Coast with the ACC schedule. So I don't really worry too much about that here either. I think a little bit too much, maybe, being made of that angle. But, again, I mean, Florida State, because of their inconsistency and Leonard Hamilton, I worry about him keeping this team invested and engaged in a game where it is 4 versus 13 and they are a big favorite. That concerns me a little bit. But that being said, the Seminoles should move on. So what does their second round line look like against either Marquette or Murray State?
Yeah, I think Florida State against Marquette or Murray State, I mean, Florida State would be a pretty significant favorite against Murray State. Florida State versus Marquette on a neutral, I think this is probably a game that's in the range of Florida State favored by 3.5 points, probably most likely. So against Murray, probably favored by 7.5 points. Murray State might get a bit of a boost for the fact that they just pulled that upset. But at the same time, a lot of these teams that pull the upsets in the first round don't play very well in the second round. So you have to be careful about that. If you pull the biggest upset or the biggest win in school history, and I'm not saying Murray State, that would be their biggest win in school history. I'm just using an example. If you pull that huge win, it's hard to come back 2 days later and play just as well. So keep that in mind.
Man, I would love Florida State and in the 3.5, 4 range against Marquette. I would really, really like that play. The quick turnaround for Howard and also Florida State, very familiar with Duke, which means they're very familiar with what Steve Wojciechowski wants to do, which is a big deal with that quick turnaround. Now, of course, Wojciechowski knows what Leonard Hamilton wants to do too, but I think Florida State just being the more athletic team there in that game, I would like Florida State quite a bit in that second round spot if we get to it. So we move to Tulsa now for the 6-11 game. We don't know who the 11 seed is going to be, Arizona State or St. John's. Do you have a thought on that game tonight?
No opinion on that game, to be totally honest with you. Both of those teams wildly inconsistent. I don't like inconsistency. It's like the stock market that that doesn't like unknowns. To me, they're both unknowns. I'd pass totally. I wouldn't want to bet that game.
All right, so what about Buffalo against either one of those teams? I mean, would you be looking to take the Bulls? Do you think they match up well against either opponent?
Yeah, I like Buffalo. I would take Buffalo in that game, would certainly be my lean. Buffalo is going to be favored in a game like that against either of those teams. Maybe in the range of, this is a hard one for me to project. Buffalo is a team that, has played so many weak teams throughout the course of the season. I think Buffalo would likely be favored in the 4-point, 3.5, 4-point range, especially against Arizona State. Maybe a little bit more than that against St. John's. But Buffalo is a very quality team. I really like Nate Oates. I like his story, too. If you get a chance to read his story about, like 5 years ago, he's teaching math and fundraising for the high school basketball team by selling Cheetos out of his office as a basketball coach. So pretty awesome story. A good guy, a really good coach. I think this Buffalo team's a really complete team. They're not great shooters. They play hard defense. They crash the offensive glass. They can press you. They can win a lot of different ways. I like Buffalo. So regardless of who they play in that game, I like Buffalo there.
No offense to Northern Kentucky, but this is one of the underdogs not getting a whole lot of love here against a higher seed. They take on Texas Tech. They're about a 2-touchdown underdog in that game. So it looks like Texas Tech will advance. I don't think we need to spend too much time on that one, unless you have a totals opinion on that game.
Yeah, I lean to the under in that game. I think that's one of those that fits into the system that we talked about the other day with a big spread, two teams who are pretty good at defense. Northern Kentucky certainly not used to playing against a defense like Texas Tech, so not a really strong lean, I would say, necessarily, but I do like the under some in that game.
All right, so how about that second round matchup that you think will be Texas Tech and Buffalo? I mean, that could be a pretty physical affair there.
I think that'd be a really good game, and I was going ahead and looking to see what I think the line would be in that one. I think Texas Tech by 4 is a good number in that one.
That seems low. That seems like it'd be pretty attractive to take Texas Tech there. I think. I don't know.
Maybe it is a little too low. Maybe 4.5. I think 5 is probably about the top of that. Maybe I'm off there, but I think Buffalo is pretty respected in the marketplace. And if they show well in the first game, I think that game might be a little bit smaller. The line might be a little bit smaller than some people think. Texas Tech also a team that not really a team that blows out a lot of teams. They win with their defense, not really efficient on offense. So, if the line was a lot bigger than that, I wouldn't be too hesitant to take Buffalo. I think this is a Buffalo team that, has said for a long time, they said, what's their goal for this season? They want to reach at least the Sweet 16. Well, they have to win this game to get to at least the Sweet 16. If they win the first game, I don't think Buffalo is just going to be happy and pack it up. I think this will be a team that would give a good effort in this game.
I mean, I guess my thought process behind it is simply what you mentioned about Buffalo, that they haven't played a whole lot of good teams and really haven't played a very good team since the non-conference. And that's always interesting to me. You go 2.5, 3 months without playing a team the caliber of Texas Tech, if you've even played one this year. You sort of wonder what that spot looks like. So that's an interesting thing from a line setting dynamic and also from the dynamic of betting the game. How much do you trust a team you really like when they haven't stepped up in class like this for a while? It's one of the things that makes betting this tournament pretty interesting and also one of the reasons why I think the NIT, CBI, and CIT yield a lot more betting value.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree with that totally. I will say the thing about this Buffalo team is, Buffalo went to West Virginia and won on the road. That's when West Virginia actually had most of their players healthy. They also went to Syracuse and won by 12. So Buffalo did play some quality teams in the non-conference slate. San Francisco, a pretty good team too, also on a neutral. So it's been a long time since they've played those teams, and they have been beating up on the MAC, and they lost a couple games they shouldn't have lost. But to me, Buffalo, a team that proved it last year in the NCAA tournament. I think Buffalo has some really high-level talent. I think they have some players on their team that are going to be in the NBA, a lot of seniors here. So I think Buffalo will be a tough out.
All right, so we go to the bottom pod here in the West, Nevada and Florida. And we talked quite a bit about this game on yesterday's show. Again, obviously, both previous shows this week with a lot of shelf life here, at least up until the games tip off tomorrow. Not a whole lot of Nevada backers out there right now. This line's down from 3 to 1.5.
This is a difficult game. So, maybe the other guests that you talk with this game about would have had a stronger opinion than what I do. I'll tell you that I think these two teams are pretty similar in that both of them have underachieved this year. I know Nevada has a great record. Look, don't tell me, look at Nevada's record, look how good they've been. I think Nevada's underachieved. I mean, they have played really poorly in some of their big games. Nevada team that had really high expectations coming into the season. It seems like that might have been a little bit too much for this team. Florida has underachieved badly. I've talked about them many times. I don't think I have to go in depth about that one again, but Florida is certainly better than their record. Their upside is high. They've proven that they can beat good teams. They just haven't been consistent about it. I don't like this game very much at all. I think that you don't know what you're going to get out of either team here. And you look at Florida, you look at Nevada, and you say, well, Nevada's probably, a more talented team, but Florida's a pretty talented number 10 seed. So, where this game's at, Des Moines, this is the under venue. The one I said is probably the best under venue, but it's a pretty low line. You have two teams who play relatively quickly. Florida tries to slow you down, but then plays fairly fastly on offense. And Nevada, a team that always wants to push the tempo. So I think both of these coaches are pretty good coaches. I think that both of these teams have been really inconsistent. Can Nevada just flip a switch? Because some people still think Nevada is one of those teams that could just make this big run and win it all because of how good they were last year. They haven't shown that to me, so I wouldn't be in that camp.
Michigan will advance. They're a 15-point favorite against Montana. Anything else you want to add to that one before we take a look at the second-round matchups?
I mean, you're just going to write off Montana. No, I'm just kidding. But Michigan and Montana, the thing I would say about that game is that, who's really excited to see Michigan play Montana again? We saw this last year. I remember watching that game, and that was not good basketball. That was really ugly. Michigan didn't play well at all. It was a really low-scoring game that just was, a total snoozer. I don't understand why they would put Michigan against Montana again. That doesn't seem really very fair to either team either, especially Montana. You'd think that they'd get a chance at somebody else. But no, nothing about this game from a betting standpoint that excites me either.
No, nothing ever excites me about seeing a team in maize and blue win anything. So, all right, so we look at the second-round matchups here. Michigan, we don't know if they'll get Nevada or Florida. I think that game, and certainly where the line is going, suggests that game is pretty close to a coin flip. So Michigan would probably be about the same size favorite against either one, correct?
Yeah, I still think Nevada's probably just a little bit more respected in the marketplace. I know that they don't like Nevada here on the opening line. I think that's partially because the public just likes taking the underdogs here in the first round of the NCAA tournament. I think Michigan's a 7 or 7.5 point favorite against Nevada. So, maybe 6 point favorite against, or 8 point favorite, 8.5 point favorite. I moved it the wrong way there as I was talking, but Michigan, Nevada, 7 point spread or so. And I have to think that, I don't think that Nevada matches up that well against Michigan. Nevada is a good team. Their depth concerns me. And as much as I think Musselman is a quality coach, most people think that Nevada has some guys on their bench that are decent players, but he doesn't play. Everybody that starts plays, and that's what they do. They have bench minutes is only 20%, 346 out of 353. I think at some point in this tournament, if they get past that first game, I think at some point that's going to hurt them that they don't play their bench at all.
All right, so we move over to the Midwest region, and I mentioned at the top of the show we were going to go 90 minutes, and clearly I lied since we're going long with this segment. And Kyle, I apologize for that, but a lot of things to talk about here with these games, with these other tournaments, all that type of thing. If it's okay with you, I'm going to say that North Carolina is going to beat Iona. No disrespect meant to Iona, but we're going to move on from that game to Utah State and Washington. And this is a fascinating game to me. This is a lot like that Syracuse-Baylor game, except Utah State, probably a more compelling team than either Syracuse or Baylor. And here they are drawing a matchup zone that they don't see very much during the season, if at all. They're going to be a popular team because everybody wants to line up to fade Washington. But stylistically, this game is pretty interesting.
I like Utah State in this game. I think that Utah State's such a good passing team. If you look at assists and how well they move the ball, they're a very good passing team. And what they've done against the zone so far this year, I know they haven't played a zone too terribly often, but I'll bring these numbers up right as I'm talking here. They rank in the 82nd percentile in the country against the zone defense, shooting the ball pretty well here and almost never turning it over against the zone defense. So I think they pass the ball really well. They have a lot of good shooters on this team. Utah State to me is a team that is built to beat a zone defense. I think Craig Smith is a guy who really encourages moving the ball quickly. If you watch Utah State play, a lot of quick passes around. How you beat the zone, you pass it. The guys who are giving the basketball a headache and trying to, dribble all over the place against that zone, it doesn't really help. You got to move the ball quickly. You got to get somebody in the high post. I think Utah State can do that. I like Utah State in this matchup. In general, I would have said that Washington could be a dangerous team, and I'm not saying that they're not a dangerous team now because of that zone defense, but I think this is a tough draw for Washington. And the way that Washington's been playing offense of late, I really worry about their chances of keeping up with Utah State. Utah State's a pretty good defensive team, a team that doesn't give up defensive rebounds. This is a team that's not going to give you second shots. Washington gives up a ton of second chance opportunities because they play that zone. I think Utah State wins the battle on the boards. I like them being able to pass the ball around and beat this zone. I like Utah State here.
Utah State also fourth in the country in 2-point percentage defense. By the way, sixth in assist rate, 61.8% of their field goals assisted here this season, at sixth in the country there. So a great breakdown. That's something I didn't realize about Utah State. Love that breakdown. And I think North Carolina crushes Washington if that's the second round matchup we get. How live is Utah State against the Tar Heels?
Yeah, I think that North Carolina, as far as what this line would be, North Carolina likely favored by 11 and a half points, something like that. I don't think Utah State matches up terribly well against North Carolina. This is a Utah State team that passes it really well, but does get defensive rebounds at a good rate. However, North Carolina is so good on the offensive glass, and Utah State doesn't play anybody that is so aggressive on the offensive boards like North Carolina is. I do think that North Carolina would likely win that battle on the boards. And Utah State's transition defense might have a bit of trouble there against North Carolina. I think that it's possible they could give them a scare for a while. If you're getting that many points, maybe Utah State's a good play, but I think that North Carolina would win that game.
It's kind of a shame because I feel like among the 8-versus-1 games that we're looking at, I would like to see Utah State against Virginia would be really, really interesting. Virginia, we know what their NCAA tournament resume looks like, and it's not particularly good. And Utah State would be a popular pick there to upset the number one. I also think Utah State would play pretty well against Gonzaga, maybe not so much against Duke, but it does feel like they got the worst number one seed matchup for them.
Yeah. I totally agree. This is a side note, and I know that me saying stuff like this is probably making it take a little bit longer, but it's kind of a funny note. I totally agree with you on Virginia. That would have been a really interesting matchup. And, we always do like a family bracket here and kind of a neighborhood bracket. And my son, being 5, wanted to do a bracket this year for the first time on his own. So he's going through trying to fill it out, and I'm trying to encourage him who to take or not to take. But, I'm letting him have his say. He just decided Virginia was going to win it. So he put Virginia all the way through, and I'm like, ooh, I'm worried. He's like, nope. Virginia's the team. So we'll see. We'll see how my 5-year-old son's first trip through the madness of filling out a bracket goes. Virginia's certainly a team that's capable of winning it, but their past track record would worry you.
It's one of those things people always complain about, the woman in the office who picks based on team colors or picks by mascots or whatever else winds up winning the bracket. this will be the year that Virginia wins it, and your 5-year-old's like a prodigy when it comes to filling out brackets here. So I guess, we've got a reason to root for the Cavaliers here to, finally slay some of those NCAA tournament demons. Let's go back to Salt Lake City here in the Midwest region, the 12-5 game, Auburn and New Mexico State, and this is your quintessential 12 versus 5 game in the NCAA tournament with a very popular dog against a pretty good, albeit inconsistent 5 seed.
Yeah, this is a really interesting game. This is one of the most interesting games to me. This is a game I definitely want to watch. This is a game played at Salt Lake City. It also starts at 1:30 Eastern, so that's an early start there, Salt Lake City. You've got Auburn going a long ways from home. New Mexico State not necessarily that close to home, but New Mexico State used to playing at altitude, and that makes a difference here. I know some people are taking New Mexico State for that reason alone. You can't really blame them necessarily, especially when the line was at 7.5. But now you're down to 5.5. You got 57% of the bets on New Mexico State, 67% of the money on New Mexico State. Yeah, I think this line might go down to 5. It looks to me like this line will likely go down to 5. It's getting tempting to take Auburn if it gets down to 5 or 4.5 or something really low. Auburn is a better team than what they played throughout the course of the regular season this year. They showed that they can be really good there in the SEC tournament. This is an Auburn team that was definitely picked highly in the preseason. They have plenty of talent. I'd be hesitant to go against Auburn here, even though elevation factor, and I do think that's a positive for New Mexico State. I think New Mexico State's a good team. I like the New Mexico State depth. They play a ton of people. The bench, Chris Jans uses bench more than anybody in the country. That's helpful here. Having said all that, it's hard for me to get past the fact that New Mexico State plays in such a weak league. I mean, when you play teams that are that bad, game after game, I mean, we talked about it in the MAC, and then, the WAC is certainly weaker than that. So New Mexico State played some tough teams in the non-conference. It's been a really long time. I think Auburn's probably better than a normal 5 seed. So, if you're rushing to take New Mexico State, like I said, it's a price grab at 7.5. Okay, that makes sense to me. -5.5 on Auburn, likely going to be even -5 pretty soon. I don't know. That seems like a pretty low price at this point.
Well, and maybe this is the best New Mexico State team that they've had. Maybe Chris Jans is the best coach that they've had. But you look at their NCAA tournament appearances, and they haven't won an NCAA tournament game since 1993. They've had to bid in terms of recent history, 07, 10, 12, 14, 15, 17, and 18. Last year, they lose by 11 to Clemson. Year before that, 18 to Baylor. Year before that, 19 against Kansas. Did take San Diego State to overtime in 2014 in the 13 versus 4 game. We're in the 13 versus 4 game in 2013, lost by 20 to St. Louis. In 2012, 13 versus 4, lost by 13 to Indiana. Gave Michigan State a scare in 2010, only lost that game by 3 points. But this is a team that gets there year in and year out, and most of their losses have been by double digits. So what's different about this year? That's what I'm wondering.
I mean, you could make the argument that this is the best New Mexico State team. I think last year's team and this year's team are pretty equal. So, I would say those two teams are pretty even. I remember betting New Mexico State last year against Clemson and losing that one. And I watched that game, and I felt like, Clemson was clearly better than them. Clemson, even when New Mexico State would make a run, you could just tell that Clemson was a better team. You watch the course of the game, and you feel like maybe Clemson lets them back in it a little bit, but New Mexico State likely not going to cover that game. I would worry about taking only 5.5 points here with New Mexico State. I think the best angle that you could take here is the elevation angle, but like I said, I think that angle works well if you have pretty equal talent. If the other team's a lot more talented than you, and there's no doubt Auburn's more talented, then I'm worried to do that. Now, Auburn takes a bunch of threes, and you never know if those are going to fall. So there's certainly variance here that if Auburn shoots the ball really poorly, they could lose this game, but this is not enough points for me to take the underdog.
Well, we'll see if this line keeps coming down. And, I agree with everything you said and your assessment of this game. This thing keeps going down 4.5 or 5. My hand's going to be forced into taking Auburn here in this one, and we'll see if they can stave off that trendy underdog pick with New Mexico State. How about the 13-4 game here in Salt Lake City? Kansas and Northeastern, and for the life of me, I can't remember people being this down on a Kansas team going into the NCAA tournament. I know they're a 4 seed, which is typically not where they usually are, but Northeastern, down to, even at some places, a 6-point underdog against Kansas is fascinating.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to say about this game, to be totally honest with you. I think Northeastern's a pretty good team. I think the CAA is quite a bit weaker than it was a few years ago. Like I did point out the other day, the CAA has been money in the bank in the NCAA tournament. So if you like that angle, then you're taking Northeastern here. I do think the CAA was a lot better a few years ago than what they are now. What do I make of Kansas? I really don't think Kansas is that good. And if Kansas and Auburn is the matchup in the second game, I want to take Auburn. And I think Auburn would be favored by 2.5 or 3 points in that second game. Kansas is a team to me that this feels like, this is not their year. They had the multiple big guys that they thought were going to be there that aren't, Azubuike, not there, DeSosa. And then Vic leaves the team. You could argue those were their 3 best players. I mean, Kansas should have been really good this year, but because of, eligibility issues, injuries, suspensions, all the things that have happened with them, Kansas is a shell of its former self. Wow, that was an interesting play on words too with Bill Self. I didn't do that on purpose, but Kansas is really just not the team that they've been in the past. I'm not anxious to bet Kansas. And when I went into this, I was thinking I'm not laying points with Kansas. And then you see, only 6 or 6.5 points. I couldn't take that with Northeastern, but still not excited to bet Kansas. I think it's certainly interesting. You got 64% of the bets on Northeastern, 80% of the money on Northeastern. So like you said, I can't remember the last time people were this low on Kansas. I do think they're right. Kansas is a lot weaker than they have been. But, at what point does that line move get a little too much?
Well, and this is the region that's, I think this region as a whole, but specifically this little Salt Lake City pod here, going to be very interesting to see from a bracket standpoint how people put together this 12-5 and this 13 versus 4. Let's go down to Tulsa here. Iowa State, Ohio State. We touched on Ohio State a little bit already, I believe, on Monday's show. We talked about how probably not a team that really deserves to be in this field, but they are a different team with Caleb Wesson and certainly Chris Holtmann, a very, very good head coach. Do the Buckeyes make any noise here in this game as, a 5.5, 6-point dog?
Yeah, I don't think Ohio State wins this game. I mean, you want to take them on the spread, I'm indifferent on that one. I think this number's about right. I think that, Ohio State is much better with Caleb Wesson. So I will say, if you handicap this game, don't go against Ohio State because of what they did against Purdue or because of their loss to Northwestern. When Caleb Wesson wasn't there, this is a different team. They're no good at all without him. With him, they're a mediocre team. They're pretty good. The problem with Wesson is that he gets in foul trouble so often. I think Iowa State can get him in foul trouble here, and if he's in foul trouble, Ohio State's at a big disadvantage. I think this line's just about right. The total, I think Ohio State's going to try to slow this game down. Iowa State will be trying to push. So I had to take something here. I'd probably take the under in this game. 73% of the bets on Iowa State, 60% of the money on Iowa State. So there is a little bit of sharp action coming on Ohio State, and that's why you get the number from 6.5 down to 5.5. I'm sure this is a game I'm going to pass on, so I won't go too in-depth on this one.
All right, so we move to the 3-14 game here. Houston taking on Georgia State. Will we get another shining moment from Ron Hunter's team, or is Houston just too much to handle?
I think Houston's too much to handle. If you look at this matchup, I think it's a bad matchup for Georgia State. Georgia State, like I said earlier, is one of those teams that plays that zone defense all the time. I've watched some Georgia State games this year. They have one massive weakness. They cannot get a rebound. I mean, other teams get tons of offensive rebounds against them in the Sun Belt. I mean, remember, they're playing Sun Belt teams here. And as much as we like the Sun Belt is a really weak league compared to the American Athletic Conference. What is Houston really good at? They're 19th in the country in offensive rebounding percentage. I think Houston absolutely crushes them on the boards in this game. I think this is a bad matchup for Georgia State. DeMarcus Simon's a good player. Certainly he can make some noise in this game. I will say his shooting numbers are down. I mean, he's shooting 28.8% from three-point range, 66% from the free throw line. So, I think you could argue that DeMarcus Simons has had a bit of a disappointing season compared to expectations, but he's a good player. Georgia State shoots a lot of threes, very high-volume three-point shooting team. Houston's second in the country at defending the three-point line, 27.6% allowed on three-pointers. I think this is a really bad matchup for Georgia State, and if I was betting this game, I would lay the points.
Houston, number 1 in the country in effective field goal percentage defense, 42.4%, fifth in two-point percentage defense, and as Kyle mentioned, they're second against the three. So the question that I have here, this sucks. I hate what they did with the bottom of this region because Houston's a really, really good team. Wofford gets screwed because they play Seton Hall in a close game, then probably lose to Kentucky. And Houston's a strong team that runs into Kentucky. I think they really stacked the deck against Houston, Wofford, and even to a certain degree Seton Hall here in the bottom of this thing. Can Houston beat Kentucky? How far can this Cougars team go?
I mean, certainly they could. I mean, the Houston team has a high upside. We saw their upside when they played against Cincinnati on the road in that game. The question mark for Houston is, can they be efficient enough on offense? And to me, Kentucky is so good on the boards that Houston's not going to be able to take advantage of Kentucky on the glass like they have a lot of teams. To me, I think it's a pretty hard way for Houston to be able to get past them. It could happen. If I think it would, no, I don't think they would beat Kentucky.
All right, so that Seton Hall-Wofford game here as we head down to Jacksonville. Again, I think Wofford gets screwed. I think Wofford got royally screwed. This first game is a tough one that'll probably go down to the wire against a solid Seton Hall team. Line suggests that at 2.5. Then the winner draws Kentucky after playing a max effort game in the late time slot in Jacksonville. Shit like this pisses me off in the tournament because Wofford deserves the chance to make a run. They're a fantastic team. They deserve a chance, and it's probably going to end before it even gets started for them. I hope like hell they beat Kentucky. No offense to anybody with a Kentucky future or a Kentucky fan, but just to shove it right up the ass of the selection committee. Do they even get past Seton Hall, though?
I like Wofford some against Seton Hall. I don't know that I really like them laying the number. I think there's a pretty good chance they beat Seton Hall in that game. I think everybody knows Fletcher McGee is very good. I don't think everybody knows how good Cameron Jackson is on the inside. I mean, Wofford is a balanced team. They have a lot of guys who can do it. Really like this Wofford team. I mean, the SoCon was really underrated this year. This was a very good conference. You could make a really good argument that they really should have gotten somebody else in based on how good their conference was this year. And I was going to say exactly what you just said there. I mean, Wofford got screwed in a big way here. I mean, everybody says, well, it was nice they put Wofford as 7 seed. No, it wasn't. I mean, Wofford would have been better as a 12 seed, right? I mean, because if Wofford was a 12 seed, then they would have played a 5 and a 4. So instead, they get to play Kentucky, who is a very good 2 seed in their second game. I mean, Wofford getting a 7 seed actually isn't even helpful to their cause. They would have rather been in the 5-12 game and been the 12 seed against, Wisconsin or somebody like that, or the 13 against Kansas State. They would have been in better shape than what they are here. Maybe they could have made a multiple game run. Here, they get a first matchup that's not easy. Seton Hall's a pretty good team. They've been playing well at the end of the year. Miles Powell, very good player. That second game, like you said, it just looks like they did not want Wofford to get to the Sweet 16.
Look, if I'm Wofford, I'd rather play Mississippi State as a 5 or Wisconsin as a 5 or Marquette as a 5 or even take my chances against Auburn. And against the 6s, I'd rather play Maryland. I'd rather play Iowa State. And they get screwed with drawing a 7 here. So it's frustrating. I hope they make a run. I really do. The hard part is even if they beat Kentucky, then all of a sudden you run into Houston, which is not an easy game at all either. So the deck got stacked against them, and it's so unfair. And I understand, okay, fine, they're in the SoCon, but I mean, this tournament is built on teams like Wofford getting respect and making a run, and they pretty much effectively took that away from them. Even give them a 10 against, give them a 10 game against an Iowa or a Minnesota or somebody instead. Give them a game where they're in a little bit better of a position to not go down to the wire maybe, and then give Kentucky a better game a day later. But, is what it is. I guess there's I said my piece, and I said it very colorfully and creatively. So I guess there's not really much more I can say about that. Last thing I'll ask you about here, Kyle, who's your national champion? Who is in your Final Four?
Yeah, I've got Duke as a national champion. I'm not a Duke fan, so I don't really hate teams so much. I like to try to find value, but I'm not a Duke fan. That I think this Duke team has such a high upside that I had to put them as my champion. I've got Duke and Kentucky in the final game, so that would be a pretty epic game. I think Kentucky has a very high upside. As long as Washington's healthy, then to me, this Kentucky team has, every chance of being there. I've got Duke, Gonzaga, Virginia, and I'm very cautious to put Virginia in the Final Four, to be honest with you. But, I didn't know who else to put in the Final Four up there. I don't trust Tennessee. Everybody knows what I think about Rick Barnes and the NCAA tournament. I mean, if Tennessee goes and wins the tournament or gets to the final game, even the Final Four, then I'll come on here and say, great job by Rick Barnes. Until that, I'm not going to trust them to get to there. So I got Virginia, Kentucky, Gonzaga, and Duke. Gonzaga is a team that I certainly think could win it all also. I'm just so scared that they play in such a weak league compared to a team like Duke or Kentucky. I think that's a huge disadvantage for a team like Gonzaga. So I've got Duke and Kentucky in the final game and Duke winning it.
I mean, you can't go against Virginia for the Final Four. I mean, your son, the Oracle, picked Virginia, so you can't go against him, right? You have to follow along there for sure. And again, I mean, Rick Barnes is what he is. The thing about the South region, and Rolf Michaels mentioned this yesterday, 9 of the bottom 29 teams in tempo in that region. The more I look at that region, the more I go, Jay Wright's going to find a way to get Villanova to the Final Four, isn't he?
Yeah, I've got Villanova in the Elite Eight. So, I mean, I think that Villanova is not nearly as talented as they've been many years in the past. And, if they lose early on, then, I wouldn't be stunned. But this sets up for Jay Wright's team to have a chance. So I think Villanova futures have some value as well.
Kyle Hunter, professional handicapper over at HunterSportsPicks.com and daily contributor to BangTheBook.com. What's going on over at your website right now, man?
Check out the March Madness All-Access Pass there at HunterSportsPicks.com. Lowered the price for that. Like I said before, you get NIT, CBI, CIT, NCAA Tournament. They have multiple plays going up here today, so if you haven't already gotten on board there, I would recommend you do so. Sign up for that free picks newsletter, also at HunterSportsPicks.com, and check out the daily article there at BangTheBook.com as well.
And check out the videos also. Kyle doing one yesterday on some futures opinions that he has, and also on some of the futures that a lot of people probably have on the number one seeds. And then also today, right, you're going to do a video on some Sweet 16 yes or no props.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one. I always like the Sweet 16 yes or no props, so we'll have a video of that going up here later today.
Make sure you go check out our Bang the Book YouTube page for that. Kyle Hunter, HunterSportsPicks.com, BangTheBook.com, at Kyle Hunter Picks on Twitter. Always a treat, man. Thanks for hanging out with me over these last 3 weeks here with these longer shows and multiple appearances per week. Really means a lot. I think we gave out a lot of great information. We'll talk to you again next week.
All right, sounds good. Best of luck to everybody and enjoy the madness.